A man near the back shook his head. This doesn't make any sense. He never spoke about another woman. His wife. He hesitated, glancing at the grieving widow, who sat frozen, her hands gripping the edges of her dress. The elderly woman's gaze softened as she turned to the widow. He never told you, did he? Her voice carried a deep sadness. There was a time, long before you, when he made promises, ones he never kept. The widow's lip trembled, but she didn't speak. The daughter swallowed hard, looking between the woman and her mother. Someone finally asked the question lingering in everyone's mind. Why now? Why tell us this today? The elderly woman's eyes darkened. Because the truth doesn't die just because someone does. A hushed murmur filled the space. Everyone knew they were moments away from hearing something that would change everything. A heavy silence stretched through the room, thick with unspoken questions. The elderly woman held their gazes, her expression unreadable, as if debating how much more to reveal. But then she took a slow breath and spoke again. "There's something else," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "Something he kept from all of you, but especially from his family." The widow stiffened. The daughter's hands curled into fists. The air felt charged, as if the truth was clawing its way to the surface. The elderly woman hesitated for just a moment before continuing. "I wasn't just someone from his past," she admitted. "I wasn't just a secret. I was." She paused, her voice catching. Then she looked directly at the daughter. "I was supposed to be asterisk, his wife asterisk." Gasps filled the room. The daughter's face paled. That can't be true," she stammered. The elderly woman's eyes glistened with old, buried pain. "He loved me. We were engaged. But one day, without warning, he left. No explanation. No goodbye. He disappeared and built a new life." The widow's breath hitched. Her hands trembled, but she didn't say a word. The daughter looked at her, searching for some kind of reassurance, but there was none. A man near the back scoffed. "You expect us to believe that." His voice was laced with doubt, but there was fear in his eyes too, the fear that she might be telling the truth. The elderly woman's lips pressed together, then she reached into her bag. Slowly, she pulled out something small, something old. She held it up for everyone to see, a faded photograph of a young man, smiling with his arm wrapped tightly around a woman. Asterisk or asterisk. The room erupted in whispers. Some guests stood, straining to get a better look. The resemblance was unmistakable. The man in the photograph was him. The widow's voice finally broke through the noise. "Why are you telling us this asterisk now asterisk?" The elderly woman's eyes darkened. "Because I wasn't the only one he left behind." The daughter's breath caught. "What do you mean?" The elderly woman's next words sent a chill through the room. "He had another child, and they're here today." The room froze. Every whispered conversation, every skeptical glance, every quiet breath came to a halt. The daughter's face twisted in disbelief. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not possible." The elderly woman's gaze remained steady. "It is," she said softly. "And they're here, right now." The guests turned, scanning the crowd, searching for the hidden truth among them. Some looked at one another, wondering if it could be someone they knew. The tension was unbearable. Then from the back of the room, a figure slowly stepped forward. A man, young, but with familiar features. The same strong jawline. The same sharp eyes. A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd as people recognized it. He asterisk looked asterisk like the deceased. The daughter's breath came out in short, shaky bursts. Who are you?" she managed to ask. The young man hesitated, then met her eyes. "I'm his son," he said simply. Gasps filled the air, but the daughter barely heard them. Her mind spun, trying to grasp what this meant. Her whole life, she had believed she was an only child, that her father had been honest, that their family was whole. The widow clutched her chest, her face pale. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He would have told me." But deep down, something inside her wavered. Had there been signs? Things she had ignored? The young man swallowed hard. "I never met him," he admitted. "He left before I was born. My mother never spoke of him much. I only knew he existed." His eyes flickered to the casket. "And now I'll never get the chance." The weight of his words sank into the room. The truth had come too late. The man they had all gathered to mourn was not who they thought he was. He had built a life on secrets, secrets that were now unraveling in front of everyone. Then, just as the room sat in stunned silence, the elderly woman spoke one last time. "He may be gone," she said, her voice heavy with meaning, "but the truth isn't buried with him." The widow turned away, tears slipping down her face. The daughter looked at the young man, emotions clashing in her eyes. The guests stood in quiet shock, knowing they would never see the man in that casket the same way again. The silence stretched on, heavy with emotions no one knew how to process. The daughter looked at the young man, her half-brother, unsure of what to say. He looked just as lost, standing there with a past he never got to understand and a family he had never met. The widow wiped her tears and turned to the elderly woman. "Did he ever say anything about us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The elderly woman gave her a long, thoughtful look. "He never stopped looking back," she admitted. "But he was too afraid to face what he left behind." A deep sigh passed through the room, a mixture of sadness, anger, and understanding. The guests slowly began to leave, murmuring amongst themselves, forever changed by what they had learned. The daughter took a shaky step toward her half-brother. "I don't know what happens now," she admitted. He gave her a small, hesitant nod. "Neither do I," he said. But as they stood there, two lives once separated now brought together by truth. One thing was certain. The past had finally been uncovered, and the future was theirs to decide. The church was packed. Friends, family, and distant acquaintances had all gathered to pay their final respects. But in the sea of grieving faces, one person stood out, a quiet elderly black woman sitting alone in the back row. No one spoke to her. No one acknowledged her presence. It was as if she didn't belong. As the service went on, whispers filled the room. Who was she? Why was she here? The guests exchanged curious glances, but no one dared to ask. It wasn't until the reception that she finally stepped forward. With a steady voice and eyes filled with unspoken pain, she revealed a truth that sent shockwaves through the entire crowd. Guests echoed across the room. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others lowered their gaze in shame. But one thing was certain, no one would ever forget what she had just said. The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes was now fixed on the elderly woman, their curiosity turning into unease. She took a slow breath, steadying herself before she spoke again. "You all think you knew him," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But there's something you never saw, something he kept hidden." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The deceased had been well-respected, kind, generous, admired by many. What could she possibly mean? A man near the front cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but who are you?" His voice carried a mix of skepticism and impatience. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I was someone he hoped you'd never find out about," she answered. A sharp tension filled the air. No one knew what she would say next, but they couldn't look away. A heavy silence settled over the room. Some guests leaned in, desperate to hear more, while others stiffened, unsure if they even wanted to know. The elderly woman took a step forward, her frail hands trembling slightly, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes. "I knew him long before most of you did," she continued, her voice steady. "Before the suits, before the speeches, before he became the man you all admired." She let her words linger, watching their reactions. Some shook their heads, unwilling to accept that their beloved friend, father, or mentor had any secrets. A woman in the front row, the deceased daughter, spoke up. "That's impossible. My father never mentioned you." Her tone was defensive, but beneath it was something else, fear. The elderly woman offered a sad smile. "That's because he never wanted to," she replied. "But I was part of